It was 7:30 a.m. on a Tuesday when I heard the commotion outside. I'm not a morning person, but the sound of raised voices and a truck engine idling right outside my bedroom window got me up real quick. I stumbled to the window, still in my pajamas, and what I saw made my blood boil instantly. There she was, Susan Mitchell, our neighborhood's self-appointed queen bee, standing next to a tow truck with her arms crossed and that smug smile plastered across her face. She was pointing at my grandfather's 1967 Chevy Camaro like it was some piece of garbage that needed to be hauled away. Two guys from the towing company were already hooking up the chains. "Excuse me," I shouted as I ran outside, not even bothering to put on shoes. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Susan turned around with that fake sweet smile she always wears when she's about to ruin someone's day. "Oh, good morning, Jake. I'm just having this eyesore removed from our beautiful neighborhood. It's been sitting here for 3 days now, clearly abandoned." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Abandoned? That's my grandfather's car. He parked it there yesterday when he came to visit. "Well," she said, checking her little clipboard like she was some kind of official, "according to HOA regulations, no vehicle can be parked on the street for more than 48 hours without proper documentation. And this," she gestured dramatically at the Camaro, "this rusty old thing is bringing down our property values." The tow truck driver, a big guy with grease-stained overalls, looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, if this is a family dispute, maybe we should—" "No," Susan snapped. "I have the authority here. This vehicle is in violation of multiple HOA codes. It's outdated, it's an eyesore, and frankly, it doesn't belong in a neighborhood like ours." That's when I lost it. "Outdated? Lady, that car is a classic. And it's legally parked on a public street." But Susan just laughed, this cold, condescending laugh that made me want to scream. "Public street or not, I'm the HOA president, and I decide what flies in this neighborhood. Your grandfather should invest in a proper vehicle if he wants to visit you." I watched in horror as they lifted Pop's beloved Camaro onto the truck. 50 years of memories, countless hours of restoration work, his pride and joy, all being hauled away because some power-hungry Karen decided it didn't match her aesthetic vision. "Where are you taking it?" I demanded. "Miller's impound lot," the driver said quietly. "Sorry, kid." As the truck drove away with Pop's car, Susan turned to me with that satisfied smirk. "Maybe next time your grandfather will think twice before bringing his junk into our neighborhood. We have standards here." I was shaking with rage, but before I could say anything else, she was already walking away, probably going to find her next victim. I stood there on the street in my pajamas, watching the tow truck disappear around the corner, and I knew I had to call Pop. The phone rang twice before his gravelly voice answered. "Morning, Jake. How's my favorite grandson?" Pop. I could barely get the words out. "I need to tell you something and you're not going to like it." There was a pause. "What happened, son?" "Susan Mitchell had your car towed. She said it was abandoned and bringing down property values." The silence on the other end was deafening. Then very quietly Pop said, "She did what?" I explained everything, how I woke up to the tow truck, how Susan stood there with her clipboard acting like she owned the world, how she called his car an outdated eyesore. With every word, I could feel the temperature dropping on the other end of the line. "Jake," Pop said finally, his voice steady but with an edge I'd never heard before, "I'll be right over. And son, don't you worry about this. Some people need to learn that you don't mess with a military family." 20 minutes later, Pop pulled up in my dad's Honda. He'd had to call Dad to come pick him up since his car was sitting in an impound lot. But when he stepped out of that Honda, something was different. Gone was the sweet, cheerful grandfather I knew. This was Sergeant Major Thomas Riley, United States Marine Corps, retired. His back was straighter, his jaw was set, and his eyes had that 1,000-yard stare that made me remember he'd seen things most people couldn't imagine. "Show me exactly where it happened," he said. I walked him through the whole scene, pointing out where the tow truck was parked, where Susan stood, what she said. Pop listened without saying a word, just nodding and taking mental notes like he was planning a military operation. When I finished, he put his hand on my shoulder. "Jake, I want you to understand something. I didn't fight in 2 wars and spend 30 years in the Marines to come home and let some entitled suburban princess walk all over my family. What are we going to do, Pop?" He smiled then, not his usual warm grandfather smile but something colder. "We're going to make a phone call." See, what Susan Mitchell didn't know, what nobody in the neighborhood knew, was that my family isn't your average suburban family. Pop didn't just serve in the military, he came from a military dynasty. His son, my Uncle Marcus, is a colonel in the Army JAG Corps, that's the legal branch of the military. My cousin Sarah is a federal prosecutor. My other uncle, David, runs one of the biggest law firms in the state. When Pop made that phone call, he wasn't just calling for help. He was activating a network that Susan Mitchell never saw coming. Uncle Marcus arrived first, still in his dress uniform because he'd come straight from the base. This man is 6'4", decorated combat veteran, and when he walks into a room, people notice. He took one look at the situation and said, "This woman illegally seized private property from a war veteran? Oh, we're going to have some fun with this." While we waited for the rest of the family to arrive, Uncle Marcus started making calls. Not to lawyers or judges, but to people whose names I'd never heard but who apparently had the power to make Susan Mitchell's life very complicated very quickly. "Dave," he said into his phone, "I need you to run a full background check on Susan Mitchell for 42 Maple Street. I want to know everything, her finances, her business dealings, any legal issues, parking tickets, everything. And I need it in 2 hours." 20 minutes later, Uncle David showed up with 3 associates from his law firm. These weren't just any lawyers, these were the kind of lawyers who make corporate executives wake up in cold sweats. The kind who've never lost a case because they don't take cases they can't win. Illegal seizure of property, Uncle David was saying as he reviewed the situation. Potential civil rights violations. Abuse of authority. Oh, and Marcus, did you know she's been running an unlicensed property management business on the side? Using her HOA position to funnel business to her own company. Pop raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" "Gets better," Uncle David continued. "Turns out Mrs. Mitchell has been padding her HOA expense reports for 3 years. We're talking about potential embezzlement charges." That's when Cousin Sarah arrived. Federal prosecutor, 5'2", but with a presence that made everyone else look like amateurs. She took one look at the paperwork Uncle David had prepared and smiled. "Racketeering," she said simply. "If she's been using her HOA position to benefit her own business while embezzling funds, we can make a federal case out of this." Literally. I was watching this whole thing unfold like some kind of legal war movie. These weren't just family members anymore, they were a coordinated strike team, and Susan Mitchell had just painted a target on her back. But the best part? They were just getting started. "Jake," Pop said, "I want you to call Mrs. Mitchell. Tell her I'd like to meet with her to discuss getting my car back." "What should I say?" "Just tell her your grandfather would like to handle this like civilized adults. Don't mention anything else." I made the call and Susan answered on the second ring, probably expecting to gloat some more. "Oh, Jake," she said in that fake sweet voice, "I hope you're not calling to complain again. What's done is done. Actually, Mrs. Mitchell, my grandfather would like to meet with you. He wants to discuss getting his car back." She laughed. "Well, that's simple. He can pay the towing fee, the storage fee, and the HOA violation fine. Should only be about $800. $800? I couldn't hide my shock. "That's what happens when people don't follow the rules, dear. Tell your grandfather he can come by my house at 2 o'clock if he wants to discuss it. But the fees are non-negotiable." When I relayed the message, the whole room went quiet. Then Uncle Marcus started laughing, a deep, rumbling laugh that didn't sound amused at all. $800, he repeated. "She wants to charge a war veteran $800 for the privilege of getting his illegally seized property back." "That's extortion," Sarah said flatly. "Add it to the list." At exactly 2 o'clock, we walked up to Susan Mitchell's front door. Pop was in the lead, wearing his dress blues with every medal and ribbon he'd earned over 3 decades of service. Behind him was Uncle Marcus in his army uniform, Uncle David in his best courtroom suit, and Sarah carrying a briefcase that looked like it could end careers. I stayed back a bit, but I wouldn't have missed this for the world. Susan answered the door with that same smug smile, but it faltered a bit when she saw the group assembled on her porch. "Mr. Riley," she said, trying to regain her composure, "I see you brought quite an entourage." "Mrs. Mitchell," Pop said politely, "I'd like you to meet my family. This is my son, Colonel Marcus Riley, United States Army. This is my son David, senior partner at Riley, Morrison & Associates. And this is my granddaughter Sarah, federal prosecutor for the Eastern District." The color drained from Susan's face, but she was too committed to back down now. "Well," she said, forcing a laugh, "I'm impressed. But it doesn't change the fact that your vehicle was in violation of HOA regulations. The fees stand." That's when Uncle David stepped forward and handed her an envelope. "Mrs. Mitchell, you're being served with a cease and desist order regarding your illegal seizure of private property. You're also being served with notice of our intent to file both civil and criminal charges for extortion, embezzlement and violation of federal racketeering statutes. Susan's hands were shaking as she opened the envelope. This is ridiculous. I'm the HOA president. I have the authority to. No, Sarah interrupted calmly, you don't. HOA authority doesn't extend to public streets, and even if it did, you've been systematically abusing your position for personal gain. We have documentation of at least 14 instances where you've violated your fiduciary duty to the homeowners association. That's not, I never. Mrs. Mitchell, Uncle Marcus said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd commanded troops in combat, you have two choices. Choice 1. You call the impound lot right now and have my father's vehicle released immediately, you resign from the HOA board, and you pray that we decide not to pursue criminal charges. And choice 2. Susan whispered. Choice 2, Sarah said with a smile that could freeze hellfire, we file charges tomorrow morning. Federal charges. The kind that come with prison time and asset forfeiture. The kind that make the evening news. Susan looked around desperately, like she was hoping for backup that wasn't coming. You can't do this. I know my rights. Actually, Uncle David said, pulling out his phone, we already did. As of 1 hour ago, all of your personal and business accounts have been frozen pending investigation. Your property management license has been suspended. And the IRS has been notified about some interesting discrepancies in your tax filings. I watched Susan Mitchell, the woman who'd terrorized our neighborhood for years, who'd made people's lives miserable over mailbox colors and grass height, completely fall apart. She was hyperventilating, her hands were shaking, and she kept looking at the legal documents like they might disappear if she stared hard enough. This isn't fair, she finally managed to say. Pop stepped forward then, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried the weight of decades of service and sacrifice. Mrs. Mitchell, do you know what I was doing when I was your age? I was carrying wounded Marines out of rice paddies in Vietnam. I was watching boys barely old enough to vote die for their country. I came home to protesters spitting on my uniform and calling me a baby killer. But you know what I never did? I never used whatever small amount of power I had to hurt innocent people. Susan was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. You took my car, Pop continued, not because it was hurting anyone but because you could. Because it made you feel powerful to push around an old veteran. Well, Mrs. Mitchell, you just learned something important. Every action has consequences. And some families don't back down. What do you want from me? She sobbed. I want my car back, Pop said simply. I want you to resign from the HOA. And I want you to remember that before you decide to bully someone, you might want to find out who their family is. Susan fumbled for her phone with shaking hands and called the impound lot. Through her tears, she authorized the immediate release of the Camaro, waiving all fees. Then she called the HOA secretary and submitted her resignation, effective immediately. There, she said, wiping her eyes. Are you happy now? Ma'am, Uncle Marcus said, we're just getting started. You see, we've also been in touch with every other homeowner in this neighborhood who's been harassed by your little power trips. Turns out, a lot of people have stories about Susan Mitchell's reign of terror. Over the next few weeks, the full scope of Susan's abuse came to light. She'd been fining people for violations that didn't exist, steering HOA contracts to her own business, and pocketing the difference. She'd forced elderly residents to pay for violations, like having the wrong shade of white paint on their mailboxes. She'd threatened to foreclose on homes over dues that were never actually owed. The final tally was staggering, over $50,000 in fraudulent fines and fees, 3 years of embezzled HOA funds, and at least 30 families who'd been systematically harassed and financially abused. But the best part? The absolute best part was watching Susan Mitchell try to explain to her husband why federal investigators were crawling through their finances, why their assets were frozen, and why she was facing potential prison time. Her husband, by the way, was apparently completely unaware of his wife's activities. He'd been deployed overseas with his own military unit for most of the past year, and when he came home to find FBI agents in his living room, well, let's just say Susan had some explaining to do. The neighborhood threw a block party when Susan finally moved out. Pop was the guest of honor, and his restored Camaro was parked right in the middle of the street, legally of course, but also as a symbol of what happens when you mess with the wrong family. I learned a lot from that whole experience. I learned that bullies often pick on people they think can't fight back. I learned that sometimes the sweet old grandfather who brings you cookies and tells you war stories is also someone you really don't want to cross. But most importantly, I learned that family isn't just about blood, it's about having people who will go to war for you when someone tries to tear you down. Susan Mitchell thought she was dealing with just another elderly man she could push around. She had no idea she was messing with a military family, a family with connections, resources, and the kind of determination that comes from generations of service to country and each other. The new HOA president, elected by unanimous vote, was Mrs. Peterson, a retired teacher who believes in treating people with respect and actually reading the regulations before enforcing them. Funny how much better a neighborhood can run when the person in charge isn't drunk on power. As for Pop's Camaro, it's still running strong. He drives it over to visit us every Tuesday and he parks it right in front of our house. Sometimes he leaves it there for 3 days just because he can. And if anyone has a problem with that, well, they're welcome to take it up with the family. But I doubt they'll try. Word gets around in suburban neighborhoods, and everyone knows the story of Susan Mitchell and the military family she tried to mess with. They know that behind every elderly veteran is potentially a whole network of people who've sworn oaths to protect and defend, people who don't back down from bullies, and people who have the resources to make your life very complicated if you decide to target one of their own. The funny thing is, Susan Mitchell could have avoided all of this. If she'd just been a decent human being, if she'd approached Pop respectfully and explained her concerns, if she'd shown even a basic level of respect for a man who'd served his country with honor, none of this would have happened. Pop is the most reasonable person I know. He would have worked with her, maybe moved his car if it was really causing problems, found a compromise that worked for everyone. But she didn't do that. She chose to be a bully. She chose to use her small amount of power to hurt people. And she chose to mess with the wrong family. In the end, justice was served, lessons were learned, and our neighborhood became a better place to live. Susan Mitchell learned that actions have consequences, and the rest of us learned that sometimes, when good people stand together, the bullies don't win. And Pop? He learned that his family had his back no matter what. Though honestly, I think he already knew that. After all, you don't raise kids who become colonels, federal prosecutors, and successful lawyers by accident. You do it by teaching them that family matters, that service matters, and that you never, ever back down when someone tries to hurt the people you love. So the next time you see an elderly veteran or anyone else who looks like an easy target, remember the story of Susan Mitchell. Remember that you never really know who someone's family is, what connections they have, or what kind of resources they can bring to bear when pushed too far. And remember that sometimes, karma comes in the form of a military family with law degrees and a very long memory.